So the topic we're talking about today is, you know, our teenagers' use of the internet, and all of the aspects that come along with this. I wanted to do this topic because, well, first off, I've got concerns from all of you as parents about, you've always traditionally limited your child's screen time, and with digital learning or distance learning, your kid is now on the computer most of the day. And so how do you combat that? This is something that like we traditionally as parents in society have been concerned about, and now it just seems like our whole world is staring at a computer screen. Also, I've gotten some questions about, teenage use of social media, especially those of you that are parents of freshmen, and coming in, I want to guess that in middle school, you probably had a lot more restrictions on your kids. And then when you come to high school, it's a whole new world with that sort of thing. So I am very lucky to have a good friend. I want to say this up front, that Jill is a good friend of mine, who is a little bit of an expert in this field. And so I asked her to join me today. She is actually Zooming in with us from Minnesota. So she is not local, but that's actually the beauty of, doing this virtually and doing these meetings virtually is not in person, is that I can ask her to join us, whereas before that probably would not have been possible. So I'm going to turn the stage over to Jill. Jill, I've allowed you to share your screen if you wanted to, and you're on. Jill, we can't hear you. Oh, technology, it's fun. That's okay.
Now?
Yes, now I can hear you. Good.
Wonderful technology. And we're on screens all day long, aren't we? So it's great to meet you. I have a bunch of information, but I didn't exactly know which direction you wanted to go. So anything we do or don't talk about afterward, I have it all in a in one page Padlet, so you can take resources away with you. So thank you for the questions. Oh my goodness, you're exactly right about the direction of the questions. So let's start with something easy, and then let's go with some tips and tricks we have. Easy with, can my child use a celebrity photo as their profile picture? So yes, and on one hand, celebrities are public domain. On the other hand, the actual picture, every picture itself has an owner, has an author. And so if we track back, if there's a way to credit, so that's all. And so if the picture came from Time magazine, came from something that's already out on the internet in that way, legally, what he or she would do would be to find a way to say, I got this picture from blank place. But that's different than using a friend's picture as well. So anytime we use a picture, tag somebody in a photo, post a photo of them, we absolutely 100% must have their permission. And you can get into legal issues without that. So anytime you can credit and find out who the owner is. And it's funny, Jenny, I had this similar conversation yesterday with teachers. And as we're walking through a session, we're talking about everything. And I just happened to say for a moment, oh, by the way, never, ever, ever, ever send your child to Google, or your students to Google Images. And then I moved on. And of course, the whole session stopped. Like, why? So FYI, while we're on images, Google Images itself, anything on Google, has a 13-year-old or older permission. So if you do happen to have middle schoolers, it's a different story. Just like, so here's a way to talk with ourselves and our teenagers. I wouldn't go on the internet and grab somebody's essay and say, hey, this is mine, just change the name, turn it into my teacher, right? So using photos is actually the exact same thing. Google Images is just a dumping ground of all, or a repository of all the images out there, and somebody owns every one of those images. So this is something, as a parent, to know that when your kids are looking through their homework, have you given permit? Do you have permission? Have you gone through settings to make sure they're images you can use? Do you have the rights to use them? Otherwise, you're stealing. And if we're going to go on a real quick between younger kids and older kids, bringing that up to college, that is something that kids actually have been dismissed for college for doing. So how's that? We've started with the celebrity photo all the way to please be aware of who has permission, who owns any photo you use. Okay, so how's that? There's our opening. Ginny, looking at the questions, do you want to, why don't you ask me something and we'll, or which direction would you like to head?
Well, why don't you show what you were going to, your resources, and kind of let's get talking, and then we can go into questions.
I love it. All right. So we see a big Padlet here, a big screen, a bulletin board of a bunch of resources. Yep, okay. So why don't we start, let's just start with a couple quick quizzes. How's that? So for yourself or for your child, or 5 questions, give yourself 1 point for anything you answer yes to. Is that? So your screen name on any social media, identify your gender. 1 point. I will go back on that. Can somebody know from my screen name what my gender might be? Question 2, have you ever posted personal information of yours or anyone else's without explicit consent? Facebook tagging, like that. Give yourself a point. Have you ever uploaded a picture or family of friends without their consent? Do. There's a point. Have you ever shared your passwords with someone? Have you ever opened emails from total strangers? I'll give you a second on that. Have you ever agreed to meet someone that you've only met online? Have you ever been involved in chat sessions with people you did not know? So most of us, I think, can say a lot of yeses. In general, for being aware, 0 to 2 points safe, or you don't live in 2020. Is it? That 3 to 4 points, there's some risk for safety. 5 or more points, and not to be alarmist, but in all honesty, there's some risk for danger. So what that means, these are the things that we do every day that we don't necessarily think about. And those conversations, our younger high schoolers definitely having those conversations, our older high schoolers having the conversations, but also helping them to own their identity online and own who they're presenting to the world. So these are all little pieces that we could get ourselves in just a little bit of trouble. Explicit consent, typically on Facebook, I personally have my settings so that somebody can't tag me without my permission. So it's not just, oh, please don't tag me, but we need to take responsibility as well. And so those are the kind of conversations to have as a family. Do other people have permission to control what the world says about you? First thing when you get a phone, do you look through the privacy settings and make sure that you're not every single app is tracking your location. Not every single app can gather information from you in the background. So it goes both ways of, are we posting about others? And then are we aware of who's posting about us? Same thing with uploading friends or family, and that it's digital etiquette, but also keeping ourselves protected. This one happens often in family and friends. the conversations to have with our kids is, how are we mixing up our passwords? Are we using the same, are you using the same word and for everywhere you go? Something I read recently is have a favorite word, take the word, break it up. So if my word was Diet Coke, I might, or Lake, whatever it is, I might put diet and then a number and then Coke, and then switch it up with, and then the name of the site I'm using, like Netflix, but switch it up every time. And this I know is where our concern is a lot with our kiddos. Are we opening mail or in chat rooms? So once we are, two things. One, always checking, getting our kids always to check the URL or the address something's coming from. But then in the chat room, have we read reviews? Do we know who's in there? And am I making sure not to share my own address, my phone number, my name, anything that's identifying? Because you're right, our kids are in our chat rooms constantly. So the question is not how can we ban all the rooms? How can we help our kids be safe while they're in there? Same thing with agreeing to meet online. Jenny, I have lots, I'm not sure exactly where we want to head, but that's just that quick awareness.
No, I think that's
Of
good.
what, yeah. Mhm.
I think that touched on some stuff. Why don't we, and I'll kind of guide us through the questions and then we can kind of go a little bit deeper into these questions. And this Padlet that you put together, this is something because I know you sent me the link, I can share this out with parents. And so
Please.
parents, what I will do when I send out the link with the video for today's meeting, I will also include this. So you guys don't panic that if you don't have the want to get this, because this has obviously a great list of resources. So our first question, I'm concerned about how addictive social media is. They spend way too much time on it, and because of COVID prevents them from doing other activities, it has taken over even more of their time. So Jill, what do you have to say about that? I know I have my opinion, but
Uh, I mean, yes, in the world that we're in, we're on screens, and the demands are on screens with uh, homework at home, right? Or distance learning. And then we have to have those personal connections. And it's crazy. Do we know that the chemicals in our brain don't do the same thing? Like what we're interacting right now, Ginny, right? As if Ginny were walking through my door and I was able to hug her, able to say hi. The chemicals don't do the same thing, but yet we're constant on screen as in real life, but we're constantly looking for those connections right now. And so that's part of, in our world of screens, how do we balance needing those connections when we can't go meet and go to a theater or go wherever? With our younger kids, there are, and I'll share several, there are a lot of little alarms and tips and tricks and games that kind of give a reminder, like, hey, go stand up, walk outside, step away. I mean, it depends on how much you want to go forward. You can even, I have something that pops up on my screen of like, have you stood up in the last hour? Have you walked away? And it's hard because when we're in there, it is addicting and we need more and more and more. There's Colin, who's the funny one? Colin Farrell, right?
I think
Well, okay, not funny. Like I get the two Collins. The one Sarah Nally has makes videos called No Device Dinners, and they're actually, I'll post them there, but hilarious, of just what can we do in our homes that once you set it down and you breathe a little bit, do we have a no device dinner, or do we have where we put it down that everybody turns it in at 10 o'clock? That's not going to work for all ages. Right? I'll stop for a second.
No, I want to tag on to that. The no device dinner, that was something, I think my first year as principal here, we had these coffees. And that was actually something that came up in one of the coffees as a suggestion. And I had a parent later tell me that she had implemented that at home and that it just had made such a world of difference. And that, people like they started talking to each other at dinner. And I think that that's something, because our kids tend to learn from us with this. And I know that I am so guilty of this, that I will have my advice on my phone, at the dinner table. And like hearing you say that, I'm like, oh, we totally dropped off on that. Like we're not,
Okay.
I need to go back to that. And my husband, too, like both he and I, we tend to think about addiction to social media as like, oh, the teenagers. I am on Twitter all of the time. I My husband is, and I especially right now with all of the election news and just that I have found that I had to do it this past weekend where I had to like forcibly force myself to put my phone down and put it away and be like, I'm taking a couple hours off and I am walking away from my phone. And it made a huge difference in just on my own personal like anxiety and mental well-being. And I remember that during that time where I was like, no, I'm out, my husband like came to me and he was like, oh my God, did you see this? And blah, 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 blah. And I was like, no, I'm out. You need to be out
Right.
too. And we're not doing this now. And so I think that this is one of those areas that as adults and the parents that we model, that we are doing this and one thing I always say is about modeling with our kids, it's not just enough to do it and think that your kids are paying attention, but actually say to your kids, I am taking a social media break
Mhm.
because it's causing me a lot of stress and anxiety and I need to walk away. And then kids, they think about that. You're planting those seeds in there that they can say like, oh, I'm feeling really stressed and anxious and maybe being on they're not on Twitter. Well, some of them are sort of on Twitter. They're certainly not on Facebook, but they're like watching all the TikTok videos. And um,
Right.
so maybe they need to step away. So Jill, what's this that you
Absolutely.
have?
Oh, just the same thing. We're looking through that mental health. So when it gets to that point of oh my, being aware as parents, is it pulling our kids so much in that that they're going to need some help, and know that that's out there because there is such a thing as mental health for tech, right? There is such thing as tech addiction, um, and so I just in one of the resources I have is uh, hotlines and places to help kids not just cope with the addiction, but if they're feeling that they're getting bullied or feeling that they're getting too much of that negative. So I just want us to know that those are out there. But like you said, Jenny, to be aware as parents, paying attention if our kids are feeling that anxiety. I really appreciate that you said actually talk about it instead of just make the rule, right? Okay, we're not having devices. Well, that's different than I need to put it down. Do you need to put it down? Do we need to? Um, I've talked to quite a few kids who have gone through I don't want to use the word quarantine, but a device where they've said, okay, I have no devices for 24 hours, almost like experiment. And they've come back and not necessarily want to jump back on so quickly. They've come back and said, I'm feeling better, I'm breathing. So ways to put that in. But then what I pulled up was just um, being aware that we can reach out in the crisis as well.
So
Sure that
this kind of, you touched on the next question I want to address. Is my 17-and-a-half-year-old too old to be monitored? He says no one his age has limits. So what
everybody has limits,
are the
right?
recommendations out there for, because in one conversation Jill and I had the other day when we were prepping for this meeting is, it's really interesting when we deal with high school age kids that especially like this time of year, right, so we are about a third of the way through the school year. Um, and so what that means is we have students with us that 6 months ago, they were in middle school, they were eighth graders,
Mhm,
they're babies,
mhm.
I mean, they're still really young. And we also have like this parent, with a 17-and-a-half-year-old that they're 6 months away from being an adult. And so how, and like as parents of high school age kids, that is something that we have to, like, that minefield of when do you still have the restrictions and when do you start to let go? Because if you still have total restrictions on your senior in high school that's about to go off to college, whoa, those are the kids, in my experience, that tend to go to college and they, you know, they lose it. You know, they just, that they have too much freedom. So you want to experiment a little bit with some freedom. So, Jill, what do you have about that?
That's absolutely perfect what you're talking about with going from the all to none or the all monitoring. And so it depends on what we mean by monitoring. I mean, yes, on your computers, have your safety, your safety, your antivirus and your cookies blocked, etc. But I think the biggest thing is having those conversations of how do we pass that baton. So if you don't want me to monitor you, how are we going to monitor and how will you monitor yourself? What do you know? So really quickly, there's a difference between our passive digital footprint of what that just people are grabbing information about you, or not people, but sites will know, hey, he went and shopped at the sporting goods place 3 times today. But our active digital footprint is everything that we are typing, we're writing, we're posting. And so with our kiddos, passing that baton really is two things. One, having the conversation of what are you posting? What can people find out about you? So I'm not going to monitor every last thing you post. Here's some guidelines. And here's guidelines about uh, I have so many resources here the guidelines about, are you posting something that could get you in legal trouble, that could make you look like you are doing something you're not. So having that, having the self, I'm sorry, I've lost my words for a second, Jenny. Having the self-awareness of knowing the control of what I'm posting. The other part of monitoring is being aware of who might be taking or getting things from me. Let me go 2 ways. 17 and a half kind of raised flags for me. If a parent isn't monitoring what kind of images are being posted, I will tell you, in the state of California, the minute someone turns 18, as soon as there are inappropriate pictures being exchanged, it can be tried as a felon. So that's part of, that 17 and a half. As a 17-year-old, what's being used of me as an 18-year-old? Can I be legally responsible for what I'm sharing and using?
So,
Is it,
Jill, I think at this point, this is
I
actually
lost
a
my,
great transition to talk about um, colleges. And then you touched on it before, and like what colleges, that they do look into this. And that, you guys have all probably seen on the news where there's been examples of uh, kids college acceptance being rescinded because of what's been posting on social media. And one thing I want to say about this with monitoring, I think that, well, I'm going to be completely honest that I don't monitor my kids' social media, like what they're doing. I am a big proponent of educating your kids, telling them about the risks so that they know, but then also because you want to build that trust with your kids. And so if you're constantly monitoring them and checking on their devices and like, that sort of thing, then you know that it erodes that trust that your kids and you have, and I think that's a really important thing that with raising teenagers, because you want them to be able to come to you and talk to you, and they're not going to do that unless they trust you. One thing I would say that with social media, and one rule that I do have, I mean, so here's the thing. I always, my son, he's young enough and he's totally not interested in this, that he doesn't have any social media accounts. But my daughter, I'm like, well, I have to follow you. I have to, we have to be friends, or on Instagram, I follow you, and that sort of thing. But even with that, realize that they make private different Instagram accounts. And so they have like their official that my parent can follow me on this. And my daughter doesn't really think I know about this, but of course I do. So just be aware, you know. I also follow her friends. So,
Yep.
you know, that way I kind of have a, you know, a better idea of what's going on. So Jill, I think you have some stuff about the colleges though.
You're exactly right. The numbers change. Somewhere between 25 and 40% of colleges admit to looking at social media during the admission process and after admission, before students have shown up. And I think in the last year, something 12% of college admissions were rescinded because of what was found in social media after admission, but before showing up. So there's something to know there. We'll look at, because your social media account, and this is good for us to know, but definitely all of our students heading out, your social media account is part of your college application, whether you know what it is or not, because that's public information. So they'll look for your profile picture. Is it professional? Are you dressed? Are you know, what's there? And just like Ginny said, she'll follow her daughter's friends. They'll go ahead, and this is not just college, but also getting a job, I'll tell you, as I've interviewed people in the last couple of years, the first thing I do is go ahead and check their social media accounts. So they'll follow not just you, but who are you following? Who are you saying is okay? Who are you connected to? What you can do as students, be in control of what you're putting out there. If you are writing an essay that says, I volunteer, I am proud of my school's athletic department, then those are some things that should be posted, because it's really an online resume in a lot of ways. Showing off your extracurricular activities. How many of us have heard through our lives, you don't have something nice, don't say anything at all. Definitely being aware, like I said earlier, either asking other people not to tag you, or set up each of their social media accounts that you can't be tagged without clicking yes. So videos and pictures about the same thing, and then we go back to everything in your account is legal. One thing that I've heard from students over and over is, oh, well, then I'll just shut down all my media. They can't find anything. That's a red flag. If there's nothing to find out about you in 2020 online, why? And so that is to be aware that the language that's being used, the pictures that are being posted, the videos being posted, everything is a reflection of us. The students should have control of what that message is. And then the fact that if there's nothing out there, that's also a flag. Does that make sense? Ginny, what
And I
questions?
think that one thing that you talk about there, and I think that this is a good rule with parents, you know, when you talk about limits, and especially if you've got, like, you know, we talked about, you know, with the freshmen, that maybe you hadn't allowed them to have social media accounts, and now your kids are like putting pressure on you because they're like, I'm the only one that doesn't have Instagram or TikTok or, you know, whatever they want. To say, okay, we'll compromise, you can have it, but I'm going to help you set it up, and we're going to make sure that you have these privacy you know, settings set. And the thing about like where they have to ask permission to tag it, is that something that's on Instagram too, Jill? You
I
mentioned
haven't
Facebook,
seen
but
it on
we're recording,
Instagram.
so
But I haven't seen it on Instagram, but on Instagram, if somebody tags you, it doesn't show up. So it doesn't show, if you tag me on your Instagram, you're just saying my name, but it doesn't show up in the same way as Facebook,
yeah,
the actual picture.
gotcha.
Mhm.
So I think, yeah, I think that
Oh, but actually, Jenny, you can put settings. I'm sorry, you can put settings that nobody can, like Twitter and say that nobody can tag you at all. You can definitely have that.
Okay.
Okay, but go ahead. Sorry. Yep.
Yeah, and I know on Instagram, you know, you can set it up that nobody can see your Instagram unless like
Mhm.
they follow you, and like so like there's definitely privacy
Yes.
settings that I think that having and like that's where I would say as a parent monitoring and making sure that they've got those privacy settings set to protect them.
Absolutely.
Um
Which brings us, oh, go ahead.
well, go ahead. I don't
I
want
would
to interrupt.
say that brings us back to all of the social media accounts, that awareness as parents to be aware, and then also passing that baton is that every one of the social media accounts has a place to report. So if somebody is tagging you inappropriately, bullying you, making comments, misusing the site, every single one of those sites um, in the privacy has please report, please tag. So just to know that you have control of you have control of that as well. And if
So
you want
one
to go,
thing I want
go
to say
ahead.
about that is as principal, and it's really so when school shut down in March, that is when I started. I send my weekly email to all of you guys, but you are hopefully are aware that around March, when school, actually, I think I started in April, I started sending a weekly email to the students also. And it really started like school was shut down, letting them know this is what's going on. And then I've just kept it up. But one thing I've noticed, and it's kind of great, that since I started that, the kids email me a lot about this and that, and this is what's going on. And so one thing that's been happening is I get, and it happens, I would say about once a month, somebody says something online that is offensive to a certain group of people. And I probably all of a sudden will get 20 emails from students. So and so is saying something that's online. You got to do something about it. Um,
Right.
and absolutely, we can address cyberbullying and people being offensive as a school and deal with that discipline. But what I've been telling the kids, you need to report that post to Instagram or to whatever social media platform it was on. And so that would be another thing to teach your kids, that when they see something that is offensive, they need to report it and flag it. And just getting in the habit of doing that. That's social media, love it or hate it, it's now part of our life. And
Mhm.
so we need to learn how to be good at it and be responsible about it. And tagging it things that are offensive is one of those.
So glad you talked about that, about reporting. Um, you have the skills, the tools, take screenshots, record anything you can. If there's something printed out on paper, one thing we look at is if like if your child's in a chat room and there's something that they're being harassed, take note of the URL or help your child take note of the URL, the address, take screenshots, print stuff out. If you can get a name, uh, location, any information you can get is important to have. It's important. So I really appreciate that you touched on that. We have go ahead.
Yeah, well, let's go into because we've got a couple of questions that are
Oh, good.
talking about like kind of the same thing, where playing video games with strangers online and the chat rooms. And I think that when people are asking about the chat rooms, that's usually part of gaming. um
Mhm.
Gaming, and this is where I see my son is 11, and he definitely loves his gaming. He's doesn't seem to be in the chat rooms just yet, but I see that happening. I see that in the future. Whereas my daughter, she's much more on the Instagram and the TikTok and stuff. This is where I see my son, and like this is like a future concern of mine. So, and another parent's talking about what they're concerned about the chat rooms and what they talk about and who their online friends are. And you, Jill, had touched about on this in the beginning, and I don't know, from where I'm seeing, I see this as another area of teaching our kids about how to protect their privacy. Um, but I also see this as a way for our kids, especially right now where there's no school going on and
Mhm.
they aren't in a classroom with their peers, this is actually a way for them to be social and have that social interaction. It's different than what we wish, obviously we wish that they were like, actually physically like, playing and hanging out with their friends and like doing activities, but this is a way to have social interaction. And I think especially for our kids like my son, who is socially awkward and super nerdy and maybe isn't the most comfortable making friends, that this is actually a way for him to express himself and have social interaction. So I guess, Jill, advice that you have about in chat rooms, how do they protect themselves? I think what you were talking about with the screen name, does their gender, are they revealing their gender or any sort of like personal information that they probably want to not have that?
You're exactly right. I mean, that's it right there. What personal information? In my gender, my location. I can say I live in California. Don't they? We should have flags, or our kids should have flags when people start asking personal questions. So there's that we can talk about things, but you'll find they'll if one personal question, a second personal question, that should be a wait a minute. I'm here to game. I'm here to hang. I'm here to play. This isn't your business to know what street I live on, the name of my first pet, whatever it happens to be. So that knowing those flags, and we get quite comfortable with people we don't know, or people because we're in that same situation over and over again. There's a bit of a misconception about, so let's say as parents we worry about the predator, right? And there's a bit of misconception that it's always this middle-aged male person, and it can come in any form. So anytime someone continues 2 or 3 personal questions, there's a flag. I know that the conversations too, I saw one of the parents like, I don't like what they're talking about. And that's absolutely true. Depending on the age of your child, it may be, hey, I'd like to sit next to you for a couple of minutes and just kind of be comfortable with your conversations. Then I'm going to leave. Depends on the age of your child. But absolutely, Jenny, I honestly can't put any more than
Yeah, and I want to
reminder.
touch
Yeah,
on the stuff that they're talking about.
right.
Um, and I want to be very honest with you, parents. When we're in in-person school, because I walk around, I do supervision at lunch and at break. You guys don't want to know what teenagers talk to each other about when they're done, because even at school there's adults around, and when I was a classroom teacher, it's amazing how they forget there's an adult in the room. Or like when I'm doing lunch supervision, I will be 5 feet away from a group of kids and like there's a principal, but they don't see it. And like the stuff they talk about, that is normal teenage behavior. They say ridiculous things, they use bad words, and they talk about all sorts of stuff that they would die if their mom knew that they were talking about that. That is normal teenage behavior. So I know when it's in a chat room, you can actually see it. And I know that stuff, and again, stuff that my daughter and her friends, that I see them like posting and chatting about on Instagram, I'm like, that's actually like the part that always horrifies me with like my daughter's Instagram. It's not the pictures or anything, but it's the comments and the language they use and what they say, that I'm like, oh my gosh. It's normal. Just that. Yeah.
It's funny you say that, Jenny, because we've had the same conversations with like Zoom breakout rooms. Like, okay, as a teacher, do you really know what every conversation, when you put kids in small groups, do you know every conversation? And that can give a bit of a stress to kids as well, of like, I don't have an outlet anywhere, right? I don't have an outlet where now, because we're so worried about all the conversations, we don't do that to kids when they're working in small groups and stand over and make sure that every word they're saying is something we would want them to say.
Yeah, there was so many times when I was teaching and like, yeah, kids would be in small groups, and you could always tell when kids were working in small groups, the if they were working or they were getting off task because the level of sound in the room, would
Right.
grow as the more they got off task. And, and I just tend to just monitor and but there's been so many times in my teaching career where I would have to say, "Hey guys, I'm still in the room. You might not want to talk about this." And they'd be like, "Oh, sorry." So,
I completely agree. Um, so let's go back just some quick tips that talk about a little bit what we've been discussing. Is we keep saying over and over, talk with your kids, right? Do they know privacy settings? Do they know not to be tagged? Do they know not to give away personal information? Post pictures about, hey, I'm out of town right now, right? And or if I'm in a chat room, hey, I won't be here for a week because we're leaving home. We're going somewhere. Oh, cool. Where are you going? Where do you live? So it's just, if I'm not going to walk down the street and tell a stranger uh, things about my own personal life, that's really the wall for chat rooms. Let's hear, let's have fun, let's enjoy. I'm not going to tell you. But then that also means I'm aware that other people aren't telling you who they really are either. So there's that. Um, Password protection is huge. Protecting their mobile devices. This is the thing we're talking about. What you share, anything you say, type, do on the internet is no longer private, right? It's there forever. And so just having those conversations of what am I saying? What am I doing? Who my real friends are. Jenny, I had an experiment with some seventh graders. So I was at Quite High School at seventh graders, and brought in all the small groups had a tube of toothpaste. And I said, okay, everyone squeeze out the toothpaste. All right, now put it back in. First of all, I did this with seventh graders. I smelled like mint for days, and for days and days. But the thing is knowing that what goes out there really can't go back in. We couldn't put that toothpaste back in the bottle. So just a couple of tips, just let you know these tips are here and available for you. Um, I'm looking at time, Jen. What else?
well, let's this last question on
Yeah.
here. Well, and first off, there was one question that was more specific about school rules, about Zooms, and it's East Side policy that we do not require kids to have their camera on during Zooms. That hasn't changed, so we aren't requiring that. So hopefully that's just a brief answer to that. So this last question is, my husband and I had to get a device to disable our kids' devices whenever we want. And we actually had to permanently disable my son's laptop, who's 15 years old, and got him a Chromebook. We can see my son is bitter about it, but is this okay to completely cut him off like this? I think this is going on to like the cutoff, that we touched about like social media, but I also want to talk and touch on that there are like apps that you can like
Mhm.
shut down, like where it shuts down. And like at this time, I've heard some people talk about that they disable the Wi-Fi at like 10 o'clock at night,
Mhm.
so that their kids can't be on, so they're not up all night. This is something that, you know, hugely became a problem in my house this summer because my son, actually both my kids really turned into vampires. But especially my son was up all night and then sleeping
Yeah.
all day. And, my husband and I were totally oblivious, like, and then we realized when he's asleep all day, like what's happening, and he's 11. So he's not 17. He shouldn't be sleeping all day. So that, is something that, you know, I think, having stuff like that, if you see that that's a problem, that your kids, I mean, kids are, especially teenagers, first, and we're going to do a meeting about sleep coming up in the next, we're doing it before Christmas. I can't remember when we're doing it, but it's during the first semester, we'll have one of these meetings about the importance of sleep. Teenagers are going to be tired. Teenagers need a lot more sleep than the normal human. So that's typical. But if you're seeing that they're up all night, that's something you might want to consider, having something where you shut down
Mhm.
um, like maybe you're turning off the Wi-Fi, or you're, one thing that you can do that we've talked about before is having a family plug-in station, like, where it's in my house, it was down in the dining room where we, kept all the devices down there. And actually we had to like physically buy alarm clocks for our house because we were all using our phone, but our phone wasn't there. We had to get an alarm clock. So things like that. And, you know, um, I think that's reasonable, where you see that. So this one parent put on there where we're using the Microsoft Family link where you can control app time, app access. There's other ones out there too. Because a parent a couple years ago suggested one to me, and I can't remember what it was called though. But I think if you did an app search about this, there's a bunch of things out there for parental controls where you can basically like lock a device,
Mhm. Mhm.
and set that up for the window.
Jenny, some people have asked, we either email this out. I'll just add another line for some of those apps as well. If you want, I can
Yeah,
post
that'd
some
be
of
great.
the.
And yes, to the question, yes, I am going to share
Mhm.
out this Padlet with all of you guys so that you have all of these links and resources. Absolutely. So one, Jill, I don't know if you have, because you do teacher trainings,
Mhm.
with using technology. One thing I'm having trouble getting my kid to, I guess I'm saying not, I'm interpreting as not paying attention to the actual class in Zoom, that
Right.
on other websites in the Chromebook. Do you block websites? What can they do about that? My problem is my son's not going on other websites on the computer, but he's got his iPad that he's like totally gaming on at the same
Two
time.
screens.
So, yeah, so I don't know, suggestions
That's
do you have about that?
um I mean, I'm sure you can guess since I do teacher trainings, part of my response is, as a teacher, what are you doing to make your class engaging or boring? I mean, honestly, I mean, what's happening is, are you lecturing the whole time and that they can just watch it later, or are you asking questions? And are so that part of that is on the class, um, and also knowing your kiddo, can they, I know we're being recorded. Can they, are they still getting the information? We're online 6 hours a day. Um, Absolutely. I mean, with Ginny, you could physically not have that other iPad next to you, right? I mean, that I understand that. With the other sites, when we have 11th graders, 12th graders, there's a couple of things. Our brains honestly don't work the same. And when kids say they can multitask, it's a different world. I don't know if you're okay with what I'm saying here, but that's it, right? It's a different world. And are they getting their work done? Are they getting, what are their grades like? Are they paying attention to everything else and not doing their homework? Are they paying attention to everything else and still getting learning? So, what do our kids need in this time for their anxiety as well? So, I'm not saying, hey, go to all the other sites. But honestly, sometimes the more we shut down, then we're shutting down everything. Kind of, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
I think I'm reluctant to say blocking everything. I think it's a conversation. I think, Jill, your point of like, what's the impact of that? Like,
Hmm.
are their grades still okay? They're doing okay. It might be annoying that you're seeing that they're doing that and they're not paying attention, but obviously if the grades are okay, then they're managing that. And that's okay. Um, so well, I'm going to say the question about the school Chromebooks, they
Hmm.
don't have restrictions on social media. Like, I don't think they can get on like porn or anything on on the school Chromebooks, but
Right.
I think there's restrictions like that. But they don't have like blocks of like social media and a lot of websites. It doesn't. Um, so what I would say, and because it's interesting because this is, I'm getting a lot of feedback from parents about the level of work, and like it seems like there's so much homework being assigned. And I had a really interesting conversation yesterday during
Mhm.
our collaboration with our department heads about this. And one thing that the teachers are saying that they're finding is that they're giving kids time in class to do the work, but the kids aren't taking advantage of that. And
Mhm.
so, and I it's certainly something I'm seeing in my own household. And so then the kids are having to use, like, because they still want to get that work done, they're having to like do that work. And so that would be, if you're seeing that your kids are like spending a lot of time when they're supposed to be in class doing something else, actually a question I would gently ask the teacher, be like, hey, what were they supposed to be doing during this time?
Mhm.
Because this is what I saw my kid doing. And if the answer was like, well, I gave them time to do their homework, and then you see your kid like doing hours of homework, and like that's a conversation I would have with your kid about time management. Like, hey, that's school time. Your teacher was giving you that time. If you did that work then and you got it done, then you could have been doing your gaming or doing the other stuff during all that time that you were up late, you know, having to do your homework. Um, so I think that it really comes down to like a time management and how are you using your time.
Absolutely. I'm going to switch. You're right, Jen. And I'm going to switch back to the other, like there was a question about shutting down the computer completely. And again, that's, um, I would want to know I don't want to know the reasons, don't worry, but I would want to know the reasons. If it's, if your child is doing something that's dangerous to themselves, dangerous to somebody else, that the computer has gotten to that point, then that needs to be escalated, and we take care of that just like we do with any other danger to ourselves. If it's if we're frustrated right now with this world and we're on screens so much, then my opinion is that goes back to those conversations of what do our kids need for their mental health, for their happiness, for their connections, and is there a way that we can balance that and say, okay, let's work with it, our no device dinners or our late at night. So having, there isn't one answer of is it okay to take my computer away, just like I tell teachers in the classroom when we were in person. Oh, they can I take the Chromebook away for a behavior issue? Well, we don't take the textbook away, so let's really look at what the issue is before we make that all or nothing decision. Okay, so
Yeah. And
some tips.
I think you have to kind of take a step back and look at the whole big picture. Is there a problem? Like they're not, they're failing their classes, they're not doing what they need to be doing, and then you look at like, okay, there's something going on and we need to fix this, but don't assume there's a problem just because they like to spend a lot of time on the internet
Mhm.
or do gaming or being on social media. Um, Look and kind of see, is there other stuff going on? And then maybe this is a problem, but don't just assume that it's a problem. Hopefully that's helpful.
So before we go, I do want you to know I have this Padlet of all the resources. My absolutely one go-to for parents is Common Sense Media. And the more, I mean, I don't know if you remember those old commercials of NBC, the more you know. But honestly, the more you know, the better we are. And so Common Sense Media has by age range. We have the tweens, the teens, the older kiddos, for kids, for parents. But things like, do you want to know what TikTok is all about? Do you want to know who those people are that our kids are talking about? Common Sense Media will have that. If we want to know, is this book for my eighth, ninth grader? Are these books okay? Are these videos okay? Are these movies okay? There's ratings for absolutely everything. So I just want you to know that that is in the resources. But honestly, Common Sense Media for any privacy, safety, advice with screen time, it's a good one-stop place.
Great.
Okay,
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I know somebody said that this was very helpful. Hopefully, you guys all found this
good.
helpful. And next week, the counselors are going to be back with me because next week is the 11th grade. If you are a parent of a junior, the counselors are doing next Tuesday evening, the 11th grade parent night. And so they will be with us next Thursday to answer any questions that you have about that. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good rest of your week. I hope you have a wonderful weekend and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
A lot of people leaving. Ginny, are you still there?
Yeah.
Hi, it's Shauna, Riley's mom and Donnie's mom. I had a quick question. Does the marking period